Recently, I had the pleasure of speaking with EscPoint, who is a game developer who is currently making his own engine using Vulkan and C++. In this conversation, we talk about his personal story with game dev, his reasons for making his own engine, and his perspectives on motivation and discipline in the rather difficult field of software. Without further delay, here's my conversation with EscPoint. EscPoint, will you please introduce yourself and explain some of your background?
Yeah. Hi guys. So I'm EscPoint. I've been probably programming for about 15 years at this point. So yeah, I started coding in a roughly about 2010, 2011. I can't exactly remember. Currently, I work as a software engineer in the general CAD industry, which is computer-aided design. So I'm not quite a game developer professionally, but that's what I do basically outside of work.
What exactly is it that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a C++ developer. I've been working in the EDA industry for about 6 years, which is to do with creating tools for people who design and create computer chips. Um, so, we sell software packages, sometimes development design tools and stuff like that, to fabricators. So a fabricator is just a place where a chip is produced from a slice of silicon to the actual die that you would put on, in an NVIDIA card or whatever. So for these engineers to do these, electrical engineering stuff, they need software to design these tools. You can't exactly get a tiny voltage tester between two tiny wires, considering you've lithographically burned the wire onto a tiny piece of silicon. That's impossible, right? So they
I
have to
see.
use they have to use like simulation tools and all these type of things to make sure that the computer chip that they've designed doesn't blow up or doesn't overheat or does the thing correctly, or there is no parasitic connection, capacitance happening. So these tools, that's what we sell. We design these tools for engineers and electrical engineers alike to test and design these chips that get put into flat panel displays. They get put into you can have chips that go into washing machines versus really integrated CPUs that go into all sorts of things. So that's what I do for a job. I make sure these tools work. I make sure the engineers are able to test things properly and able to measure voltage and all sorts of heat. It's another thing we do. Make sure that things don't overheat. So these tools need to be accurate. They need to be accurate for these particular type of tiny wires that live inside silicon chips. So yeah, that's what my job is. That's what the EDA industry is in general. So yeah.
Okay. Sounds like you practice attention to detail both on
Mm.
the job and off the job.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, it's really important that the tools run fast. They do the job. Yeah, so it's really important because a mistake in a DRC check, which is part of our tool, can cause a whole thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousand pounds of worth of silicon to completely be wasted because you can't reuse it. So yeah, it's really important that things get done right.
Is it too much doing C++ all day and then coming home and doing more C++?
No, that's something I really do enjoy through
That's
and
good.
through. Yeah, C++ is although I write almost C++, it's very low level. It's like low level. It's very basic type stuff.
I
But
see.
I do like the way that C++. It's one of the things I really enjoy about this language, and I think Rust and C and other languages like it allow you to get really close to the metal in ways that allow you to get real fast performance. Like you can use SIMD operations, for example. You can't do that. Well, maybe you can, but I don't think you can do that in like JavaScript, for example.
At
That's
least
like
not at the
got
same
20.
level.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's I really enjoy that, like trying to get things to be really efficient, looking at the assembly and stuff like that. So it's like it's a treat for me to work on C++, honestly. Although it's annoying, in the sense that it's difficult. I can appreciate that, but the puzzles I get to solve with C++ are really, really fun. So yeah, that's why I like doing it at work and after work.
Nice. And that probably keeps you sharp with C++ as well, just getting a lot of practice in.
Yeah, totally. Without a doubt. I mean, when it comes to game development, it requires a high level of skill. and I think that's an uncontroversial hot take there. So, yeah, it does require you to to be switched on with C++ and whatever language you're using. So yeah, is the fact that I'm putting in a lot of hours is definitely a benefit to making games and stuff like that. All the way back in like 2010, I was working on little DOS box type games. So it would be like calculators and can you unscramble this string in two or three things. But in like 2011 was my first graphical game where I made Pong.
Nice.
Surprising
Classic.
to no one, right?
Yeah.
I remember in like I made it in SDL 1.2, and it's terrible. Honestly, it's really bad. The music I chose was a shocker. I don't know why I chose it. Everyone who's played it said, "Why have you chosen this horrendous music?" I can't change it now, right? It's too iconic for me. And after that, I made another little game. I called Bird Invaders. Again, SDL 1.2, and it's a funny story about that game. The gameplay is only 30 seconds long, because I had a memory leak that caused the game to crash
Oh no.
in 32 seconds. So I didn't know how to fix it at the time. So I was like, I guess the game's only 30 seconds long.
There we go.
Yeah. So after that, I started to give a serious go at game engines. I decided in you know, my humble ability that I had at the time, I was like, I'm going to make a physics engine. So I made a 3D real-time physics engine for some reason. I was really interested at the time, like how did collision detection work? And I thought graphics didn't matter because, physics, if you can't walk around in your video game, then what's the point of playing your game, even
Right.
if it looks pretty? That took many years, and I got much better as I did that. But I found out that the way I was going about this was probably a bad idea. So that was my first real game engine, and I had to abandon that project in the end. I will eventually reuse some of that code. I think some of it's still good, but it still yeah, that engine needs to be left the way it was. And after that, I really was interested in like, okay, let's try and make some 2D games. So I made some 2D games with based on at the time I was going through. If anyone's familiar with the Cherno on YouTube, I was going through his Hazel game engine series. So I made a similar game engine, almost one to one. I have to admit, and I made a couple of 2D games there. At the same time, I made a Minecraft clone. As any game developer does back then, you make Minecraft clones, and that was interesting because I actually got back into 3D with that. And yeah, since then I've been making my new game engine, which has a small game. I have to admit, I did a game jam. I've got lots of little game jam games now because I'm really interested in trying to compete with other people who use game engines to basically prove that I can hang with people who are using game engines. Because I have this idea, right? Maybe it's too much pressure or something, but if I can't make a game engine that's as functional in a way that I want to make games, as say Unity or something, then I shouldn't really be using my game engine, right, to make games, which is
Yeah.
kind of a difficult situation, right? Because game engines limit you in particular ways, whereas like if you make your own game engine, you've got ultimate freedom, but that means you need to implement everything yourself. So with this game engine, I'm trying to constantly iterate over what I've done in the past and make game jam games to continuously test myself and try to step up to other people who are using game engines. And I think at some point I've got plenty of ideas I want to implement. I want to make some really cool games, but I'm very limited by my technology, and I think with this climb that I'm constantly going through, where I constantly iterate over little game jam games with my game engine, I think eventually I'll get there. So yeah, they're the projects I've been working on.
That's awesome.
I've also started to document my progress. I think I've been putting that up on YouTube, and that's just again to keep myself accountable and make sure that people know that I'm alive and working on things.
Yeah.
Because I do want to make these like I don't want to talk about them because if you talk about them, I feel like you're less likely to make them. So I keep them secret.
Yeah. Overall, your approach to game dev is pretty technically oriented. Was it the tech itself that led you to game dev in the first place?
Oh, what led me to game development in the first place? Now that is a completely different path. So like I said, I started programming in 2010, and I just loved coding at the time. It was like I could get my computer to do stuff. What? That was really exciting. And I was learning Java when I first started out. A really old version of Java. I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. I really struggled, honestly. It was not a simple process for me to learn. And
Not simple for
what
anyone.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, everyone has to start somewhere. Um, so what led me to game development was after I'd learned a bit of coding, a friend of mine was interested in 3D modeling and he wanted to make games. And he was a few years older than me, so and extremely charismatic as well. This guy was like he had so many friends, it was crazy. Everyone wanted to be his friend. I really liked him. I wanted to be his friend. And with his charisma, he was able to get like a bunch of people together who weren't interested in making games, but they all wanted to work with him and all wanted to be his friends. So they were all like super enthusiastic about working with him to make games and stuff. So I was included, and I was over the moon. And I this was like in 2011, 12. I really wasn't taking programming seriously at the time, and I was like, wow, I'm included. Okay, cool. I was still quite young, and I was like, hey guys, I can use OpenGL 1.1. And if you don't know, that is really old OpenGL. Even back then, it was old. That was OpenGL you would use in the 90s. So I really didn't know what I was doing. And neither did anyone else. And because of that, I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep getting better and better. I was considered the worst programmer in the group as well. There was another programmer. But as all things were, things yeah, petered out. People, started to give up and get bored. Very common story with game developers, right? Especially aspiring game developers. They they get excited by the idea and then not interested anymore. However, I was completely all in. I was like, okay, if you, I it's funny because I saved up £1,000, which would probably be like $1,250. And I was like, okay, I've spent a year saving. If you want to open an office, I'm ready for it. I'll spend all my money on opening an office. And I was like, 17 at the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because I was so enthusiastic. But things didn't end up working out. But I still kept on with that. And what ended up happening was because things ended up, petering out. I felt like I wasn't good enough because I wasn't able to support the developers, or I wasn't able to support the guy who was leading the team in making, games that he wanted to make. And I was also the worst programmer, so that made me like double down and like triple down on trying to get better as a programmer and as a game developer too. So that's what led me down this path that I've veered off a couple of times. It's not been consistent, but I've always come back and I've always wanted to be that guy in the game development group that really knows his stuff and is able to make technology that can support artists and game designers alike. So that's why I like to come from it from a technical point of view, because back then I wasn't good enough and now I'm going to be good enough, right? And you may think, why not use a game engine, dude? Everyone uses a game engine, and we can get into that if you want.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but back then, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how did your early experiences with programming kind of influence your decision to make your own engine?
Exactly. That's the thing, because back then in 2011 and 2012, it wasn't obvious that you would use a game engine to make games. And if you think about it, back then we had Unity 3D. It was available, but it only did 3D at the time. I think in 2013 or 2014, something around then, Unity did 2D. So we wanted to do 2D games, and it's like, okay, Unreal was too expensive. It was it
Yep.
was like you had to buy a license, and
And too
get other
confusing
game
if you
engines.
ever tried to learn it.
Oh yeah,
I I
I
I
think.
I
Uh-huh.
remember I struggled. I had like this a much older PC at the time, and I struggled to even
Mm,
download Unreal Engine, let alone use it.
yeah, yeah. It was a beast even back then. I mean, it's difficult now from what I've heard. Um, so yeah, Unity 3D, and then we had Unreal, and then at the time there was lots of little engines. that would do specific things. Like if you wanted to do a point and click adventure, there would be a point and click game engine. RPG Maker existed at the time, but it was much more limited than it is now. And there was a couple of things, but I didn't know. I didn't know any better at the time. I really had no idea how you make games because nowadays you just go on YouTube, right, and type in how do I make games, and it's really obvious. You're given three engines to pick from, and then you pick one, and then that's it, and then you just keep going, right? But back then, game developers were using frameworks like there was a framework that was really popular back then called XNA, which was like a Microsoft supported framework. But again, I didn't know about this. So I started with, SDL 1.2, and that's what I thought was like what everyone did. So that's what I started. And yes, the game engines, again, eventually like 2015, 16, that was when they started to get really popular, when everyone started to use them.
Yeah, that sounds about
But,
right.
I was like, okay, well, I've been coding in C++ and SDL and later OpenGL, and I was like, well, I've already started to make a game engine. I guess I'll just continue. And so ever since then, I've, been more interested in making my own tech and rather than switching away from a game engine. So that's how I got started. And yeah, that's what inspired me really. It's like, being a terrible programmer to begin with, being a part of this group where I was like the worst programmer, still having a great time, by the way, in this group. And
That's
then
good.
there being no other option at the time that was like incredibly obvious that you would switch to make 2D games, which was what I was interested in at the time. And so yeah, I just decided C++ is the way to go. SDL 1.2, and OpenGL was how I started things. Yeah.
That's super cool.
Mm.
Especially that you were programming back in 2010. I think in 2010 I was just goofing off. It's fun.
Mm.
It's funny. My first interaction with programming was Java as
Mm.
well. But for
Mm.
me,
Oh,
it
that's
was I was playing a lot
funny.
of Minecraft with my friends, and I wanted to be able to make mods for us to play. So I thought, oh,
Ah.
I have to learn. Minecraft was written in Java. I have to learn Java. So I
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
attempted to learn Java and ultimately didn't stick with it. And it was many years until I kind of
Mm.
re-challenged myself with programming again. But super cool
Mm.
to hear in your story you actually ended up sticking with it, and it
Yeah.
kind of built you into who you are today.
Hmm.
Um, is there anything else that changed as a result of your early experience with programming? Like, were you a big video game player? Was that part of
Oh
your
yeah.
inspiration for becoming a game dev? And then also on top of that, how has your
Oh yeah.
relationship with games changed since you started making them?
Oh yeah. I've always like when I was a kid, always been fascinated by video games. I think when I was playing the Spyro franchise and if you know anything about Spyro, the artist actually I found out recently this is kind of cool, but the artist made these really nice skyboxes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you would be able to like fly as Spyro the Dragon is like a little you know 3D little purple dragon. I think everyone knows this, but I'll just say anyway.
Yeah.
And it's a 3D, yeah, it's a 3D action platformer that's a little, it's more for children in the sense that it's not like hyper difficult or anything like that. So what you would see is if you looked out in the skybox, was like you would see like mountains behind like vague painterly mountains behind some like clouds and stuff. And I always wanted to like go over there and like I always wondered like, oh, what's over there in those mountains? I didn't know at the time that was a skybox that I would never be able to get there. But that was always something I wanted to like find out and like why couldn't I go over there? And in Spyro again, especially in Spyro 1, there would be like these invisible walls, and if you hit these invisible walls, they would be literally there would be a physical effect that would happen. So it would like bounce you back, and I was like, okay, why can't I go past this invisible wall? What is it? Like I would try and get through it as much as I could, and I was like always curious, like okay, well I can play this game, but why can't I go over there and see that mountain? Why is this wall in the way? And so these type of like things like set seeds in my brain where like, okay, I really need to know what this was about. Why was this the case? And I've had lots of little things that over the years have like inspired me to make games like that.
That's super interesting. It kind of sounds like
Mm,
it's like games were almost something to figure out. It's like I
mm,
can see this mountain. Why can't I go over there? And
yeah,
then
exactly.
it kind of intrigues your interest. Like, well, how? What even is a game? What is it made out of? How exactly does it work?
Exactly. So I always think of it like it's like being a kid and seeing a magician. Like you see a magician on stage like do some magic and you're like, wow, that's crazy. How does that work? And as I've like learned game development, it's like I've seen the magic isn't there anymore, because I've seen what's behind like the curtains and like how it's done. But
Yeah,
now it's like, and now I get like another layer of appreciation where I can be like, wow, they've used this technique, they've used this, they've used that, they've done this lighting technique. They're doing this, they're doing that. That's making this like really difficult to render scene like possible, with all these like super advanced techniques.
yeah.
Um,
It's almost like
so
you go from as a child thinking like, oh my gosh, this game world is so big. How did they make it so big? Until you're like, oh, this
yeah,
game world's actually super small, and then you kind of grow the
yeah.
appreciation back. It's like, wow, how did they fit more than 10 assets in this room?
Exactly, yeah. So it's like, simple things like back face culling, which, for those who don't know, it's like if you imagine a building that has four walls, if you're facing one wall, it won't show the back face of that building, which is a really simple like technique that's used all the time, especially in 3D. Maybe sometimes in 2D, I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, this is like a foundational technique, but it's like as a kid, you're like, oh yeah, this is just obviously a solid object that has, that I can go into this building and walk around, but they won't let me in. For some reason, I didn't understand that you can't just go in every building
Yeah,
on the PlayStation 1. But now it's like, oh, I get to appreciate like how much the optimizations, the lighting, like maybe there's doing like physically based rendering, all that kind of like really cool techniques that are used in, modern game engines. I can appreciate that now. Yeah, that's another. It's like another. I get to enjoy games at another level. Now I've been able to, make my own stuff.
yeah, yeah. It's funny what you mentioned about like 3D models being solid because it's like I
hmm
kind of assume the same thing, and I guess
Mm,
you wouldn't assume that all the objects in the game worlds are hollow, but I remember having that
mm.
experience where it's like I think I had a couple experiences where the camera would clip into some asset and I would see that it was hollow on the inside, and
Oh yeah.
I'm like, what's going on here? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Sometimes it's painful, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it isn't fun, like, when you're debugging some memory allocation corruption or something terrible. You're like, ugh, game developers have to deal with this, not just the fun stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's other, yeah, but I can still appreciate, how much effort's gone into things.
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I thought games were made almost like how levels are made in Gmod, where it's like, oh, let me drag in the
Mm.
helicopter, let me drag in the gun or whatever. It's just like
hmm
drag and drop, and then everything develops their own systems. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, you just press play and it all works.
Yeah, you hit play on the game making engine and just makes your game for
hmm
you.
Because I mean, yeah, helicopters, the rotors spin, obviously. Like, what else is it gonna do?
You bring up a good point about some of the more, I guess, trivial, mundane, or the tasks that feel more
Mm.
like chores. Do you ever feel like
Mm.
those bog you down? Do you struggle with things like burnout or
Mm.
staying motivated to do the mundane things?
Yeah, it's a good point because it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and I think yeah, game development is tough. It's definitely the hardest thing I do in programming, without a doubt. The amount of complexity that you have to deal with just to get anything to render on screen is higher than you would expect. Just to render a simple triangle nowadays is really tough. So yeah, it's some of the stuff you have to like eventually deal with when you want to get things more complicated working, like animation, for example, which is what I'm working on right now. Trying to get that working. Yeah, it's tough. So how do I deal with burnout? I think burnout is dependent on your expectations you set on yourself, especially when it comes to your own projects. And I think pressure as well. I think that's another part of it. So let's just assume that I'm like I said, working on animation, and I assume that I need to get this done today, and I expect myself to get it done today, for example. And I don't, right?
Hmm.
Then I can work really, really hard to try and get this done, and I still fail, because it's like maybe a difficult task or whatever. Well, I think burnout accrues over time with these type of like small failures. For example, it's really easy to work hard when things are going well, for example, right? Everyone can work hard when, you know, you're compiling and, you get no compilation errors, everything just works first time, the shaders all compile lovely.
Yeah.
But I think with burnout, it's like best to make sure that you're concentrating on something that matters. And I think personally, focusing on how much time you're putting into a project is super important rather than the objective that you have in mind. Now, the objective I think orientates you, orient, what is that word?
Oriented?
Orients you. Yeah, I think you can have like a goal that orients you to like to point yourself in the right direction. But at that same point, once you have that goal, you've also then got to like, let's just say like put one front foot, put one front. But yeah, at the same point, you've got to put one foot in front of the other to actually make progress towards that goal, right? So you've got to have these realistic goals, and then you've got to make sure that you're putting in the time, and that's all that matters, right? Because I think, let's just say animation takes me 3 weeks at my current experience level, for example. Someone maybe do it faster than I can, for sure. But if you're putting in all that time, it's going to take you 3 weeks, like no matter what. Even if you put in 3 weeks worth of work in 1 week, it's going to take you that same amount of time. So I think that's a really good way to make sure that I personally get motivated by making sure I'm putting in enough time and making sure that I don't get burnt out by not putting myself in this situation where I'm constantly on this treadmill that if I don't keep running as fast as I can, I'm going to eventually, fall off. Got to keep going and going and going. But like if I just focus on, okay, it's going to take 3 weeks to do this. That's fine. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I assume it's going to take 3 weeks. That's just keep going. And that's what I typically focus on.
Yeah, I've noticed
And
in the
that's how
Discord you've been logging your development hours, and what's kind of interesting about that is like
Mm,
you see the message in the chat, and it says nothing about whether you successfully implemented what you wanted to implement. It doesn't say anything about whether or not you achieved your goal or not. It's just
yep.
I did 3 hours of dev today, and that's like
Yep.
its own win in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I personally literally have a timer. This might be a bit over the top for some of your audience, but yeah, I literally have a timer that when I'm coding and not just sitting there looking at the computer, that's different. But when I'm actually doing the work that's required, I have a timer that just ticks up. Um, and yeah, that's all I focus on. I focus on getting that done, and getting that number as high as possible, regardless if I succeed or not.
Yeah, I found for me it's almost kind of like there are
Mm,
times where I feel like, oh, I'm not spending enough time
mm,
on what I want to be focusing on. And it's kind of hard because I look back at the week, I don't exactly have any idea how many hours I've put towards dev
mm,
or any other
mm,
responsibilities. So it's like no matter what that number is, because I don't know it, I just assume that it wasn't enough. But if I can actually look back
mm,
and see, oh, I've done 10 hours this week, that's pretty significant. Like
hmm.
I can totally see that tool being a good way to just feel good about what you've done and not second guess yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I think as well it's
Or maybe on the
what
other
was I
side
saying?
of it, you're like, oh, I've
Hmm.
only done 3 hours this whole week,
Yeah,
and I wish
exactly.
I could have done more.
That's the thing. I really try to take the point of view that when I'm programming, I'm at a blue collar type job where I just sit down and I just have to, make the donuts. I just have to crank away at this particular task. And there's no glory in it. There's no victory in it. There's just the task that needs to be done. And that really makes me focus on the actual doing rather than the actual like let's just say all the planning or whatever, because you can get trapped, as I think as an artist. I'm more of an engineer. There's no denying that, I think, but I'm trying to create art in video games, I guess.
Hmm.
But there is like this issue where you can get trapped in the ideas of what you want to do,
Absolutely.
where it's like, yeah, you're like, oh yeah, this is like you have this fantasy and you're trying to like picture like the perfect design document that will make it work 100%. And you're constantly polishing the ideas, but at the same time, as I would call myself an artist, maybe that's a bit too pretentious, but as a game developer, I should say. So as a game developer, you've got to eventually, in my opinion, just sit down and crank away at it. There's no way of doing it any other way than just to sit down and do the actual work. And I think I really do think of it as like I'm just gonna do this over and over and over again until it's done. And that's part of the motivation with the timer. It's just to make sure that I'm dedicated and focused on the actual task and not just imagining myself working for 16 hours a day and assuming that I'm doing the best, you know. Another thing with it is I think it's a great way to measure. I think there's like a small saying, you can't improve what you don't measure. So you can't improve what you don't
Yeah.
measure, right? And I think that's a great way to make sure that you're consistently being a good game developer, by making sure that you measure how well you're working. And it's a great way to improve or, you know, adapt to particular situations, and make sure you prioritize what's important. Because maybe you're working too hard, like you just said, Ku- uh, Coot,
Kukatu.
Kukatu, yeah, yeah.
Admittedly,
Maybe it's
it
like
doesn't roll off the
yeah,
tongue very easily, I think.
no, Kukatu. I don't know. I think I've got it now, but yeah. So it's like one of those things, right? If like you just said, Kukatu. It's like if you feel like you're working too hard, then you know if you're measuring your progress, then you can be like, okay, I'm going to cut it back. You know, maybe 50 hours a week of just game development and not talking to my family is probably a bad idea. But
Right.
you know,
Uh,
it's one of those things, right?
yeah. Let me actually circle back a little bit.
Sure.
So a lot of game devs today celebrate more traditional aspects of game technology
Mm,
like pixel art or chiptune music. But I
mm,
noticed in one of your most recent videos, your video features implementation of mesh shading, which is a
mm.
relatively new graphics pipeline, which is something I
Yeah, yeah,
actually I had no idea of until I watched your video. In your view, what
yeah,
role does new tech play in game dev?
yeah. What it plays in game dev is it just allows more freedom. I
Mm,
think for creative expression. So that's my motivation, right? So with like older game styles that everyone seems to like, right? Not everyone, but you know, pretty much, you know, it's pretty popular. We have demakes, we have like retro games that, you know, people still play to this day. It's like, you know, gamers really like retro style stuff, and I personally really like chiptune too, so you know, I can appreciate that. And I love looking at excellent pixel art. That's always a nice thing. But but with newer, you know, game engine advancements and stuff, like newer technology that gets implemented, you have games like Octopath Traveler 1 and 2, which are, you know, traditional RPGs, right? You know, they're all pixel arty and stuff. But then you have the Unreal engines like, you know, you have the Unreal engines like massive lighting engine that makes it look extra special, right? And extra cool. And this is like the reason I think that, you know, you can have old techniques that allow you have like these old techniques that allow like more creative expression with the newer techniques. And that's my motivation with mesh shading, right? Mesh shading, I'm pretty sure that mesh shading is going to replace the traditional graphics pipeline in the future.
hmm.
And I think planning for that and adding that in to my game engine as a separate code path for the people who don't know, mesh shading came out in 2018 on NVIDIA only cards. So if you've got an NVIDIA card that's got RTX written on it, it also has mesh shading capabilities, which is a newer version of the pipeline where how triangles are pushed through to the GPU and handled. So with the modern mesh shading, it really simplifies the pipeline, but it allows more granularity when it granularity. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
It allows, yeah, it allows you to, you know, do things more precisely with like triangles and stuff, and it removes some of the older, slower parts of the graphics pipeline. And with that being done, right, you're allowed to you free up the graphics card to do more, you know, interesting graphical effects. And I think, and for those who, it's not just Nvidia, by the way. It's like AMD have implemented it on their cards as well in 2020. I'm not exactly sure what graphics card is the oldest for the AMD cards,
Yeah,
but it's now out there for everyone.
I'm wondering if my
Hmm.
AMD card has it. I'll have to look into that, see if I can
Yeah, yeah.
screw around with some of the some demos online or something.
Yeah, I mean it's already been used in some commercial games. I think Alan Wake 2 had a brilliant talk from the developers talking about how they used meshlets, which is a new primitive, which a primitive is like a triangle, so a new type of shape. That's what a primitive is, basically, just a shape. A new type of shape that's been used in their game engines to make, it's a new type of shape that's been used in their game engine to improve their rendering capabilities and allow their artists to really express themselves. So I think, even if we have, for example, let's just say I make a Octopath Traveler, I don't know, a spin-off, I don't know, maybe I don't know what I call it, a 2D pixel art game, basically. I can leverage my technology to allow any artist that I work with to, completely go wild, or if they want to make a PS1 inspired video game, which are very popular now, they can make the enhanced PS1 games that they had pictures of when they were a kid, right? You can go back and be like, when I was a kid, I imagined it to be like this, when I saw PlayStation 1 games. And, having that capability in the engine allows that type of thing to be, available to, artists and other game developers that I potentially will work with in the future. And I think that's true for like also, Unity and Unreal and Godot and all those type of things, right? Everyone's pushing forward and trying to allow more technology for artists and designers and all sorts of things to be used. So that's my answer for that question.
Yeah, that's a good
Hopefully that was
answer.
answered.
It's like making the transition from making design choices from necessity
Mm.
versus making design
Mm.
choices because they're choices, I guess.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, totally.
like just in the past 2 weeks, I think I've watched
Mm.
like 10 YouTube videos about rendering grass, and
Mm.
like how cool would it be if I just didn't even have to worry about that? Like, what if I could just make
Mm.
millions of draw calls and it'd have no effect on performance?
Mm-hmm.
It would just
Mm-hmm.
it would probably would enable devs to just be more creative,
Mm-hmm.
spend their time more so making design choices and being creative as opposed to, all right, how do I how do I batch all these draw calls together? How do I
Mm-hmm.
If developers can spend less time optimizing the technical side of it, they can spend more time
Mm.
doing the creative parts of it. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
I do think programming is very artistic and very much an
Mm.
art. So don't
Mm.
discredit yourself.
Yeah, I just don't want to come off as pretentious, like I'm an artist with my beret tipped.
Artiste, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah, it's like it's what video games have always done, to be honest, if you think about it. Like
Yeah.
throughout history, if you were a video game company and you could render more things on the screen, you could make a better video game and you'll sell more units. Like that's just the way the industry has gone. It's quite an interesting development. It's like we've game developers have kind of branched off from let's say regular developers. I don't want to discredit other people, but it's like we've always been interested in trying to push the hardware to its absolute limit because that leads to better products at the end of the day, and that does help with sales. I think there's like I'm not sure if you're aware, like there's a movement online that really hates temporal anti-aliasing, which
Oh.
leads, yeah, it's an interesting group of people, right? They criticize how smeared games look, right? I can point out some examples, but like one that sticks out to mind is when you're playing Hogwarts Legacy, which is a brilliant video
Oh,
game in its
yeah.
own right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you
I've
see
seen
the
that.
grass. Yeah, yeah, it's like smears when you move the camera, right? It's
Yeah.
called ghosting. Like and the thing is, if you can crank out the same level of performance and get the same level of, let's just say, graphic fidelity, right? Without that smearing effect, without temporal anti-aliasing issues, you're gonna make a more competitive video game that more people are gonna play because gamers are always, I feel like they're always interested in having that like better, faster experience. FPS needs to be 120 nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Whereas back in the day, 30 FPS on the
Yeah,
PlayStation
that
2
was
was
pretty good.
fine. Yeah, it's and we're only rendering it like a 480p, and Shadow of the Colossus is considered one of the most best um, PS2 games that exist, but that was only 480p. But nowadays it's like 4K, 120
Yeah.
frames per second. So there's this like constant drive that game developers put themselves under, I think, as well. And gamers also appreciate to really drill in and make things as lean, as fast, and as good as they can. And unfortunately, that means that games take a long time to make. The complexity of the software gets really hard, and yeah, you've got to really know what you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting to think like games like Shadow of the Colossus. How would they have been designed if it weren't for their limitations? Maybe
yeah, exactly.
Would there have been a level where you faced more than one Colossus at the same time? They might have chose to do that if they could have done that. It's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that with like Shadow of the Colossus, they could render fur really efficiently. And that allowed the artist then to make these Colossus with like things that you could climb on the PlayStation 2. And if you don't know, they're like rendered like multiple triangles on top of each other, and it kind of like had this effect of fur.
Oh, is that how they did
That's
it?
how they did it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like it's an old technique that's not used anymore, but it's like those type of things allow artists to be like, oh, cool, I can do this for now. I can do this now, cool. Or even designers, right? I mean, you got to think about it. Like, it's not just like artists can make pretty things, right? It's also like designers can, they can give like a new visual language to like the game that's like walking around. Like, it's really important that you like set up paths, for example, in like a 3D open world game for players to follow, right? And with new technology, you can add more intricate details that allow players to follow like a particular path to like the Master Sword or insert thing here, right? That you want the player to experience. So it's not just about making things look pretty, but it's also important for like a game design point of view too.
Yeah. You've mentioned the PlayStation 1 a couple of times. Do you have any favorite games from either back in the day or currently?
Oh yeah, favorite games. I mean, that's changed over the years. I always come back to Final Fantasy X.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm a bit of I do like RPGs. I played a lot of Final Fantasy growing up. Final Fantasy X. I think really has this depth that you can really dig into, or you can just overgrind and like Pokemon, level up to the highest level and just steamroll everything if you really want to. But it has this like really nice balance where if you want to go fast, you've got to put in more effort to like figuring out different mechanics of how things work. Or you don't have to. You can engage in the system or you don't. And I think the story in Final Fantasy X is just phenomenal to this day. Yeah, so that's the one I'm thinking of right now.
Nice.
Ask me in a week and I'll come up with a completely different answer.
Yeah, when I think about my own list of favorite games, it does. It's a list that gets very long because I like different games for different reasons, and I love
totally.
I love a game that has good story, but then there's just games that are fun to play. There's plenty of games that are really fun to play but have no story, and that's what's fun about games is just how diverse they are.
I agree. Yeah, you've got all sorts of games. Like I remember Spyro, for example, Spyro 1. It was the first game that really used level of detail. And so you had different levels of detail as you would look into the distance, and the designers used this to like entice players by having glimpses of gems in the distance. And I remember like on this particular level, I can't remember what it's called. It was like a Grand Canyon type level. Like I would climb to the top of all this like this building thing that was along a cliff, and at the top you would see like glimpses of gems, and the level of detail allowed the renderer to render all that distance. And you got brilliant things like that with old games. So I think Spyro is another one that I really like. I like the early Kingdom Hearts games. That's another one.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I've got like I always say Celeste as well as like another game that I really like.
Yeah, I love
the music
Celeste.
in that's really good.
Yeah, it's interesting
Yeah,
how
it's brilliant.
like the pixel platformer has like stood the test of time. It's still a huge genre, especially for devs, and maybe that's because it's a more approachable game to make. But I was gonna say I don't know if you've ever like played some older games on like PC emulators, but like for example, so Mario 64 was a game I played as a child, And a few years ago, I was playing it on my PC on emulator. But there's a ton of graphical things that you don't quite notice on
Mm.
the older consoles, but you do notice on the PC emulators. So like, I remember back in the day, I had a very similar experience where like I would see a mountain in the distance, and I'm like, oh, I want to send Mario to that mountain, so I'd hop in a cannon and fire myself in the direction of the mountain, but then I just fall into the skybox and die, and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But then when you
Yeah.
play it on PC, you can just more strongly see the compression of the skybox texture. Like it's super pixelated and grainy, and you can kind of almost like see the surface of the skybox, or you can see the corners of the skybox.
Yeah,
And
you
that
can
was
see the
like,
seams. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's like that wasn't something I could see on the N64 on my parents' old CRT TV, but
Oh, yeah.
on a PC emulator. And the same goes for the coins. I thought the coins were 3D objects, and then when I was playing them in the emulator, I'm like, oh, this is just a 3D sprite that's always facing the camera. It's not a 3D
Yeah,
object.
yeah, yeah.
And I feel like there's tons of little things like that that you don't notice until you either get like a higher resolution monitor or an emulator, or.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how like the games industry has been like playing tricks on us for decades.
Oh, yeah. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah,
Yeah, all of it. All of it.
just like a magician, like you said earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can appreciate it. We can appreciate it now as we see what's behind the curtains. We see it at a deeper level, the effort that's gone in. The magic is spoiled, but we have a new magic to enjoy.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, and that's a good note to end on. Unless there's anything you'd like to say further.
No, I think I've enjoyed this talk. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. I really appreciate what you do. I've enjoyed your videos that you've been posted every now and again.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and be sure to tell the viewers where they can find you.
Yeah. So I've got my own YouTube channel called EscPoint, or EscPoint if you want to, if you want to call me that. Yeah, I try and document my process, although it's slow going. Admittedly, I can't really release a video every week.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah, it takes a long time to make things good. So yeah, look me up on a EscPoint. You can join my Discord server and ask me some questions about things if you maybe if you're interested. So yeah, that's where I can be found. My Discord server can be found in the links of videos that I put it in there. So if you look up, you'll find me quite easily.
Please do check out EscPoint. He's got some very technical videos, very interesting videos. I'll link his channel in the description.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next time.
See you guys.